And of course, the cities of the future that we build should all be evolutionary in a way that they can adapt to changes. What I spoke about before, public space that adapts to unforeseeable events.
Hi guys, welcome back to episode 2 of the IBD Hub podcast. Today I'm with the two co-founders of SUPERWORLD, Maxime and Thomas, which in my opinion represent the architects of tomorrow. So hi guys.
Hi
Julia.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. I'm glad to be here to talk to you.
I was wondering if you could maybe present yourselves. Like, I know you guys for quite a while, actually. Maxime has been years, even. So could you present yourself and maybe tell me a bit more about SUPERWORLD?
Hi, Julia. Thanks for having us. So we know each other for quite some time, but for the audience, it might be interesting to know. My name is Maxime Cunin. I'm originally from a small village in the forestry part in the southern side of Belgium. I'm a partner, co-founder at SUPERWORLD. From formation, I'm an architect and engineer, which I practice both in the private sector, and I was also involved in the academic sphere as a researcher at MIT. Now I'm focusing my time on SUPERWORLD, trying to push the boundaries of what the architecture profession means to me.
Hello, Julia. Thanks for having us today. So my name is Thomas Krall, and I'm one of the co-founders of SUPERWORLD. I have an architectural background myself, having studied in Germany, United States, and the Netherlands. And after having worked in Denmark, we started SUPERWORLD here in Rotterdam.
SUPERWORLD is a practice that is based in the Netherlands, in Rotterdam. And Thomas and I founded it a couple of years ago with the idea to explore and experiment with evolutionary systems, alternative models, and soft transitions towards a world we want to envision living in. We adopt really an exploratory approach to understand how we want and we should inhabit our common planet that reflects both of who we are as individual, Thomas and I, but also how we want to push the profession towards something that is more inclusive and more in our values, I would say. And we're basically trying to leverage the in-between practice scopes. We're trying to hack some conventions and trying to find synergies in between different fields, such as economics or energy, mobility, and more traditionally architecture and urbanism.
And I think this is also why I wanted you to speak with me on this episode. I think your vision of cities and urbanism is refreshing and new. So that's why today I would like to talk about how cities and urbanism will evolve through time, especially after this pandemic. And really have your intake on how you see things evolve. Do you think that we will change our ways to design the cities?
Well, in a way, like if you take a look in history, COVID-19 is just one public health matter that we have. And in the past, we already have encountered those. So in the past, urbanism with a focus on hygiene usually resulted in three different consequences, or let's say aftershock effects. So you would have better living standards for a large part of society, which is a really good thing. You would have more governmental control on over the population, so that's a bit more on the downside of it. But also you can see that there's acceleration of urban evolution in general. So in terms of creating or evolving new kind of typology in the built environment. So for instance, the sanitation system came in ancient Rome after the plague, and more down to earth and more close to us. You can see that Haussmann urbanism was really in Paris was really a consequence of health crisis, and that brought those really wide streets and being able to breathe in the city. And then you had also other similar examples, such as the Garden City and the modern movement that was all about trying to make the city either more clean, whether it's in its aesthetic, but also in how we interact with nature. So all this create better living standards with more access to green spaces, but also it tackles different kind of parameters such as daylight access or air pollution. And in the same time, it's as I was saying, it's creating a bit more of a top-down control that might be a bit to be mitigated, but it's also in a way how we inhabit our planet as citizens, more as urban planners or built environment stakeholders. But I think also interestingly, you have those new typologies coming up with the Parisian block, for instance, or bathhouses and flat roofs in a way.
Yeah, so we can basically say that thanks to pandemics in the past, it has pushed architects and designers to find new ways to have a healthy city and really like perform in engineering way to make the city healthier, and that helped society to evolve through time. But how would you relate this to the current situation? Do you think that the social distancing will have an urban impact on the cities today?
Well, if we speak about these three things that Max mentioned, in a way, the good consequence that standards of living rise, that's something we could be able to see being caused by a COVID-19 crisis, in a manner that maybe we develop new standards. Governments will develop new standards of residential developments that actually force for more shared outdoor space, more space to breathe and have air and light in case of lockdowns, as an example that we saw in some parts of the world quite rigidly. So there's these kind of consequences. Of course, there's also the negative aspects, in a way that already now there's talks about things like tracking systems, monitoring systems in the public realm that are a very that is a development that we need to be looking carefully into as a democracy, as a society. But then also urban typologies that we know today might just evolve, and that includes not only buildings, like we might see malls and office towers, like these places where we have a lot of people being bundled together. We might see them getting more rapidly extinct in our cities, whilst at the same time, maybe our public spaces find a kind of new dimension to them, a new level to them, where they provide more space in new developments for people to walk outside. We've seen that in some examples in the UK, where private streets that are usually used by cars and pedestrians are purely used by pedestrians, by government regulation, in a way. And we've also seen that plazas in some cities have become places where temporal hospitals can occur. So I think this new layer to the public space is something that we might be able to see more as a consequence of this first real 21st century pandemic.
What we're seeing, and what Thomas just mentioned that is really interesting, is that you have this new relationship between private spaces and public spaces, and that you have this evolution of those spaces into something it was not intended to. And then in a way, diseases and pandemics are nothing else than another parameter for resiliencies in our city. You might consider as well flood resiliency or heat resiliency that we are talking a lot in the field these days, because we are living in a highly urbanized environment already, but that means we're not going to build many new cities from scratch, at least not in Europe, but we're going to base and build upon what we already have in the cities. And that means you need to be creating a new kind of rules are applying onto an existing urban fabric. So it might be more small and smart interventions that are more effective to reply to those issues. We're not going to pull another Haussmann urbanism master plan because we don't have the financial capacity, the political power, or even now we have parameters about sustainability that we know that you need to reduce as much as you can what you have already present in the urban realm. So if we build new urban districts, you can take disease as another parameter of resiliency that you need to bring onto the table as a parameter. But it's just going to be another parameter amongst the other ones I just cited before. So if you look at other resiliency parameters such as flooding and heat or social resiliency, the most effective measures are the ones that are mutually beneficial between different parameters. So for instance, green roofs onto existing structures are not only good for the energy consumption of the building itself, but also it's just bringing more diversity and more visual access to green spaces. Another example might be that parks in new development can be providing flood protection as well as sufficient open space for social distances and access to public spaces in general. It's just the fact that taking a monoparameterization on how you behave in city and how you plan cities is just not really a good approach, because instead of creating a tolerance for pandemics and showing that qualitative coexistence between pandemic and how a human life is possible, you're going to have something that is more towards one direction. And we know that we are all living in an ecosystem in a way. We all live in interaction between each other, whether we talk about humans or other kind of parameters. So we all live on the same planet. So you need to kind of foster those interaction and relationships.
So could you tell me maybe how these relate to stakeholders and how we will build the cities of the future?
Yeah, in a way, I mean, so what we need to see is that, if we speak about the cities of the future, is that resiliency, urban resiliency, is nothing but a mitigation of symptoms. They're not a cure to the original problem. So the problem in the first place, and then we try to make our cities resilient, usually, in order to weaken the effects that the problem has on us. It doesn't cure the disease itself. And what we find if you look at pandemics such as COVID or other ones that we had in the past, and more frequently, especially, is that there's a lot of common denominators between diseases and the bigger challenge of the climate crisis, in a way that we see that diseases are fostered by a new kind of human-animal interaction, by increasing biotopes, by more extreme temperatures or more vulnerable ecosystems. These things are strengthened by that, and they will happen more frequently. So in order to really tackle that problem, we need to tackle the big problem of climate change. And in that manner, the future of urbanism and all the stakeholders involved in it, they need to do these two things, which is mitigation of the problems we already have, but also try to decrease the original cause of the problems, meaning reversing or stopping or ideally reversing the climate change. And that's why we as SUPERWORLD are also looking at this problem as a holistic entity, as the overall system. We're not just trying to create the engineering solutions to the different aspects of it, but actually see it as an overall entity. And we try to play or interact with this system, craft the system in a meaningful manner, so we can do both. And that has many layers, if you want to say. So there's of course the layer that we need to construct, ideally in a carbon positive way, if we do new urban developments or upgrade our cities. We need to speak about upcycling, new green mobilities, new kinds of energy, the resiliency and biodiversity that will allow us to be better prepared for new pandemics coming up, or the other effects that climate change brings. We also need to of course, look what Max said before, look into the social aspect of it. Our ecosystem involves humans, so we need to create also resilient communities that are strengthened, that work better together, and also have a more localized and human to human kind of solutions to situations like the current one. And of course, the cities of the future that we build should all be evolutionary in a way that they can adapt to changes. What I spoke about before, public space that adapts to unforeseeable events. That is something that is quite of essence in a way, not only in terms of pandemics, but also many other parameters of the climate crisis. Of course, there's also going to be economic layers to this, to the cities of the future, and many others. But we're trying as Superworld to tackle them as a holistic whole, instead of just picking, like doing the conventional planning process where you resolve single ones of them. So I think that's how the cities of the future should be built in a way.
We were mentioning before, there's no organism that exists in isolation from the other ones. In biology, ecosystem can be defined in many different shapes. So it can be mutually beneficial, or in competition, or parasitism, and you can find all those kind of interaction in cities and countryside, for instance. So you can think of relationship between economy, resources, legal framework, and I think that if you're trying to build cities or to interact with the built environment, you ought to be thinking about all the interactions in the system. So, for instance, one that is more related to the human construct that Thomas was mentioning would be that you have now indigenous governance systems where you have social structures that are part of a more resilient built environment. So you have relationship between and within communities and interactive with many layers of the society, or what makes our modern world, such as energy, housing, or mobility, for instance. And then you can find many of those international communities are trying to tackle local challenges, as energy cooperatives or residential self-initiated development. And so those local communities are organized around local needs. But what you can see now is that those structures are becoming something different. They are repurposed into something more relevant to what the social and the local needs are. So in a way, this is all part of this non-tangible structure of what our cities are made of, that we are really interested to dive into, because we see that there's a lot of potential and of failure, but also of success on how to make our cities.
Yeah, and I think, like, if we can give you two examples where we try to apply this system making, this ecosystem thinking, is that we were working on a strategy in Russia about shifting the entire construction industry to the one resource that we have in abundance, which is timber. And we wanted to cover like the full spectrum, the full scope of this holistic system. So we didn't only think about the architecture or the city block that would be put in many cities in Russia in a way, but also about the communities, the value for the people living there, how we can strengthen the communities, make them more resilient in a way. But also the economic aspect of this, meaning what does the supply chain look like? What is the current industry we can be building on? What does the market for timber, the legislation, all these things look like? And all of that in order, in a way, to create a carbon positive city. That is quite in our agenda in a way. And another example we have in Belgium, maybe Max, you can explain on that one since you're the local.
So that was another example where we're trying to shift from old model of mobility that is car driven towards more soft and pedestrian driven mobility. You have now in cities a lot of drivers for cars, and then talk about parking spaces, for instance, are in the city. And then it's interesting to think on what's the mobility of the future, or what is the future we want to be like in mobility. And therefore, you are left with a lot of redundant infrastructure that are in the public space. And then we're trying to think on how to repurpose those into something that is really useful for communities, but also in the same time that are being that can be put in place in a low-key manner, in a quite fast fashion, and that can profit the bigger community. So it's all about it's one of the evidence for ecosystem urbanism that we're trying to think about, and system making that extend beyond only one discipline, but trying to tackle mobility with more urbanism, and trying to also have a merge between a top-down approach that might be digital-driven and data-driven approach, where you can have GIS data informing what kind of program you need and where, and also the top-down approach where you would have the people that are involved in the design process and having participatory processes put in place to have really people engaged in the environment, and that they feel they can participate in the making of the city they want to live in.
Yeah, I was wondering, because of course now that this pandemic crisis has been ongoing, we have been talking about sustainability in a more sustained way, actually, than before. I think that probably authorities have started to think about it as a necessity. Do you reckon that this will carry on the long run? Because my feeling is that architects and engineers are really trying to push sustainability forward. But of course, the regulations and the political motivations are always slower than the people who want to innovate. So do you see that there will be a strong change, or do you think that things will proceed as slow as before in the end?
Well, there are examples of this happening already now. Like I think what social distancing brought in this case and lockdown is that you have an acceleration and concentration of decisions that would have taken a decade and now that are accelerated. So for instance, you see that there needs to be more authorities are thinking on re-triggering the economy, and in the same time they are doing it with some conditions now. So for instance, Austria decided not to give money to its airline companies without having a really strong sustainable agenda. So you have the companies that should be carbon neutral or reduce drastically their carbon footprint. And for instance, in Amsterdam, you have also the donut economy system that has been put in place to, once we're going to trigger back the economy, it's going to be oriented towards the direction we ought to go for as a society. So I think in the end, we should be building more systems that are interrelated and that are far beyond the original agenda that we have. As Thomas said, just mitigating the effect of what we have now is just not going to be enough. I think we need to be visionary and also in the same time pragmatist on how to get there.
Great. I think it's good to have a small conclusion.
No, but maybe then to conclude on what was just said in this conversation before. In our belief, the consequences of this COVID-19 pandemic, well, it basically comes down to creating a more resilient ecosystem, urban ecosystem, but also try to change or to reverse the original cause of many of these problems, which is the climate crisis. And we can do so with many by many measures. We need to see it as a holistic entity. The built environment and the humans living with it, they shape an overall ecosystem. And I think that's also really at the core what we're trying to do with SUPERWORLD, is that we try to envision or dream, if you want to say, about these ideal systems or how these systems can be improved, how it's a better future, whilst trying to figure out a way on a very bottom or like down to earth process to actually get these implemented, and without it lasting a very long time. That's really that.
Thank you so much for both giving your view on the subject. I'm really happy to have you on this episode too. So thank you for your participation. And I'm looking forward to see more of SUPERWORLD and your projects. I will put the link of your Instagram, Facebook, and website in the podcast, so people can go and check out your amazing startup. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.